Okay, today we're going to do a brake job on this barn find car that's been sitting for the past 10 years. Obviously, you can't see it, but 3 of the 4 calipers are leaking. The fluid's nasty, so it's going to need 4 calipers, 4 brake rotors because they're in bad shape, the rubber hydraulic lines, and the master cylinder. So we're going to start with draining the fluid that's in there, which is pretty nasty. I like to use a suction assisting tool. Open the line and we'll let it start to drain. This only takes a few minutes and it's much easier than cleaning up a big mess after you break the lines open. So I always like to evacuate the fluid first. Next, I'm going to break the rigid line free from the flex hose on the trailing arm and where it goes into the caliper. These lines are in good shape, so I'm going to reuse them. A lot of times they're not correct. People have bent them, they're damaged, they're rusty. You can replace them with new ones, but these appear to be fairly new, at least not rusty. Always use a line wrench so you're not rounding off the nuts. Once I get the line off, remove the 2 caliper mounting bolts, which are behind here. You can't see from that angle, but if you're doing the job, you know where they're at. A lot of times I like to use air tools to take stuff apart, but since we're doing a video, I don't want to make too much noise. Okay, and then remove the caliper. Set that aside. The rotor has already been deriveted. Somebody's done brake job or spindle bearings once upon a time, and so we don't have to derivet, which is kind of nice. If you do, I like to drive them out with an air hammer. Some people will drill them out, whatever's good for you. And these areas where the parking brake shoes ride, these have been replaced. They're stainless steel. We don't have to service those at this time, but we are putting new rotors and calipers on. So, the rear's done. I'm going to move to the front, and we're also going to do the master cylinder. Okay, now we're onto the front. I want to evacuate the fluid from this, just like we did the rear. Open it up. Doesn't take long with suction. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Close the bleeder off. I'm also changing the hose in the front as well. So I'm going to knock that loose while the caliper's still bolted on. Remove the line from the frame, disconnect the rubber hose from the frame, same style clip that was on the rear, that we can reuse. Unbolt the caliper. Nice. And voila. Now that the hose is loose, we can spin it off, just because we're not using it, but once again, the rotor's been deriveted, so it should come right off. Unless the studs are bent. There we go. Yucky, nasty. These are what they call the cooling fins. You see how rusty they are, how thin they are? I'll show you the new ones. Rotor might be thick enough to fit under spec that way, but if the fins look like this and they're that rusty, chances are it's going to get hot, it's going to warp on you, and it's not safe. Okay, so prepping the new caliper, installing the pads, and cleaning the brake rotor. Do this 4 times. They're all pretty much the same. The only difference with the rotors is the rear has additional holes for adjusting the parking brake shoes. Make sure you get those on. And the offset is just a little bit different. I've seen guys put them on incorrectly and wonder why the brakes are dragging. Well, it's because the rotor offset's different and it's applying pressure. So, remove the cotter pin, remove holding pin. I like to use a little bit of dielectric grease, brake grease, whatever you want. I put it on the inside face of the pistons that make contact with the brake pad. Not a lot, because you don't want it slinging off. Just a little bit. And I also put it on the leading and after edge of the brake pad. I like to install the pins from the outside in. I've just done it that way for 30 years, and I don't know, I guess my thought is if it happened to come out, the wheel's going to stop it from falling out, where if it's on the inside, it's just going to fall out. Call me weird. It's just the way I've always done it. And to get the pin through, caliper's ready to go on. I always clean the surface that the pads will be on with brake clean. You don't have to do the hat or the inside part. I've already done this one. It's nice and clean, so we're going to walk it over and put it on the car. These are the new hoses. We've done all 4 of them. Paragon part number 6024 for the front and 6025 for the rear. Made in the USA by Americans. Woohoo! Gonna leave that one on. All right, now before we reassemble this with the new rotor, we got to make sure that the parking brake shoes are adjusted properly. A lot of times, the new rotor is going to be smaller in diameter than the old worn out one. Some people machine this area. Let's just see if this is going to fit. Nope. So the star wheel adjuster down here, we just back that off. Make sure they're centered. Try it again. Still tight. A little more. There we go. Then I secure the rotor with all 5 lug nuts because I'm going to check for run out, meaning make sure it has very little lateral run out, because if it has too much, the brake pads are going to oscillate in the caliper, and that can sometimes cause air to enter the system and give you a soft pedal. So to measure that, I use a dial indicator, magnetic base. Mount it on the trailing arm, make sure it's not loose. Set up the tool so you can watch the dial and check your run out. I go around once or twice just to make sure. I don't know if you can see that or not. We'll do a close-up here in a second. This one's good, believe it or not. I had like 2 thousandths. That's spectacular. You don't want any more than 7 because it will make that not so kosher. Okay, now I'm going to put a new caliper, or remanufactured caliper, and new brake pad set on. I like to hold it apart with my hand. There's a tool you can buy to keep these separated. I just do it like this. There. Reinstall the bolts. I usually like to put a drop of oil on the threads. Make sure the lock washer's in good shape. Put them in and then torque them down to 50 foot-pounds. Get them both torqued to 50 foot-pounds. Another thing I like to do is make sure that you have adequate clearance for the caliper and the pistons and the brake pads. Sometimes they're too tight. If that's the case, then the caliper mount is probably bent, and then you have to replace that. This is good. Okay, now we need to replace the rubber flex hose. It goes from the trailing arm to the frame. It's really hard to see. You got to remove the clip. We can reuse that. It's in good shape. And then the 5/8 line wrench. Bust it loose from the frame. This is another reason I evacuated the system with fluid, because this is a mess if you don't drain the master cylinder and all the lines. Plus we want fresh fluid in it when we're putting it together. And you don't have to wait until a hose dry rots or gets a bubble in it. I say 10 to 12 years is a max on these. So, and most of them are dated. If you look on the new ones, made in the U.S. by Americans. I get, see, the date on this was 12/6/20. It's 2 years old. It's been on the shelf. That's fine. Easy to install. Screw it back in, tighten it down, and refit the clip. I'm going to tighten it down with the line wrench. Put the retaining clip. Tap that on with a hammer. Now we can refit our rear rigid line. I start putting on the caliper first. Start at a few threads. Make sure it's not cross-threaded. And then attach it to the new line that we just put on the trailing arm. It's fine. Snuggy, snuggy. Again, line wrench. Tighten it, loosen it a little bit, and then tighten it again. All right, so now this is done until we bleed the fluid out of all 4 corners. You're going to install the new rotor on the hub. And I did check the bearings. They're decent. The grease still looks fairly new. This car's just sat for over 10 years, and that adversely affected the brake system. Normal .3 brake fluid is hygroscopic, meaning that it attracts water, moisture. And that's where the rust comes from. And we got 4, almost 5 thousandths on the front, which is still under spec. I like it to be less than 10. Actually less than 7. So, second run out on the front. I'm sorry you can't see it, but this is the way it's mounted. It's the same as we did in the rear. Find a good perch to put it. Verify that it doesn't have excessive run out. Now we're ready to put the caliper on. I've already loaded the pads. They're on there. Same thing with the front bolts. Make sure your lock washers are in good shape. Drop of oil on the threads and refit them. Just run these in. Also torque those to 50 foot-pounds. Straighten this. And then attach the hose into the frame. Make sure it's not twisted. Has a nice flow to it. Refit the clip and the rigid line on the frame. Just tap it in. Another line wrench, 3/8 for the line. Snug it down, and voila. Now we're going to change the master cylinder. Okay, well, as you can see, this master cylinder is quite cruddy, really rusty. Like I said, .3 fluid is hygroscopic. It attracts water, moisture, And I don't think that this master cylinder was ever painted. That's why it looks as yucky as it does. So anyway, first thing we're going to do is break the lines loose. The front and the back, respectively. There. Back them out quite a ways, and then take the two nuts off the booster. Like that. Now, got a new master cylinder. It's just like the original equipment one. It has the bleeders, and it also has these little plastic plugs to keep dirt and debris out. We're going to remove those. I'm going to put these plastic cap plugs in and tighten them up so we can bench bleed this before we put it on the car. Those in, snug them up. I put this in the vise. Doesn't have to be super tight, just enough to hold it. Remove the cap. We'll add our .3 fluid. You don't have to fill it all the way up. I fill it about halfway, just so you can see the bubbles as they come from below. And I always bench bleed master cylinder before I put it on, whether I'm doing it with a brake bleeder, pressurized, because there still can be air trapped in the piston down below. So carefully, short strokes. I don't know if you can see that. The air bubbles are coming up. There. Ta-da. Refit the cap. And we'll remove it from the vise and install it on the vehicle. All right. We'll just put the new master cylinder on. Snug up the mounting nuts. I don't tighten them down. Always make sure that there's some rags down below, because once you take those plugs out that we put in to bench bleed it, it will drip. So one at a time, I will reattach the rigid line to the master cylinder. Get this front line on. We'll snug that up as well. Tighten once more. There. If you did happen to drip any fluid, just wipe it off. There. Master's on. Now we have to bleed the rest of the system. Top off the fluid and then let it gravity bleed, meaning that with this lid off, both of these cavities full, I will go to the furthest point in the rear, start with that, and let the fluid make its way to the back if you don't have a bleeder. I mean, most people don't have a $600 brake bleeder at home, so we're going to do it the manual way. I just always make sure that that stays full. So after it starts gravity bleeding, I come around and check. Fluid will start to go down, and I just keep adding to it. You don't want it to go dry where you get air in there again. Start with the rear. It's the farthest from the master cylinder. I got the lid off. It's full of fluid. I want to gravity bleed this, so I'll just open this bleeder up and let gravity do its job. You can force it through, and you can also suck it through with this. that tends to aerate the fluid, meaning it'll cause bubbles in it, and then it'll end up taking you longer to bleed it out that way than it would if you just let gravity run its course. All right, now that we've gravity bled this, I have an assistant in the car that is going to manually pump the brake pedal 3 times. I'm going to open the bleeder, starting with the inside rear, and we're at the right rear, the furthest away from the master cylinder. And we're going to bleed this caliper until I see no air in the line. All right, Cass, go ahead and pump it 3 times. And then hold it.
Holding.
Crack it open. Some air bubbles. You can't hardly see it. I can. Is it down? All right, let it up. 3 times again, and hold.
Holding.
Okay, let it up. We do that one more time on the inside, then I'm going to switch to the outer. I really didn't see any air bubbles that time. You holding?
Pumping. You want me to pump?
Yeah.
Holding.
Okay. Yep, you can let it up. I'm going to move to this bleeder on the outside. Go ahead, pump it.
Holding.
Just a couple air bubbles. All right, let it up.
Okay.
Pump it again.
Holding.
That looks good. Okay, you can let it up. Do this to all 4 corners, starting with the right rear, right front, left front. After every caliper bleed, open the master cylinder up, make sure that the fluid is not dropped down to where you're sucking air, because you have to start all over again. But we should have a good pedal after this.